Thank you very much, Professor Jameson, for joining us today. We really appreciate you taking the time out of your very busy schedule. So, I just wanted to talk to you a little bit about your very long and illustrious career. You've been awarded so many different accolades and awards over the years. One that springs to mind immediately is your award for services to engineering, science, industry, and the environment. You were recognised in 2005 and appointed an Officer of the Order of Australia. I can see you're wearing your pin at the moment, which is a wonderful recognition. Can you tell us a little bit more about some of the many awards you've received over the years, Professor?
Well, the Order of Australia was a great pleasure because I had no knowledge that it was going to happen until they wrote to me about a month beforehand. But it was organised, or rather it was supported by some of my colleagues at the university who gathered together all the background material without my knowledge. So that was a very, very pleasant surprise because it's very nice to be recognised for your general contributions, really, to those things. And so anyway, that was a great pleasure. Other things, the other really big thing was the Royal Society of London. You'll possibly know that this has been going now for 370 odd years. It was founded at the time of Sir Isaac Newton, and there are many, many illustrious scientists who have been fellows since then. And in fact, when they announced the Nobel Prizes, half the people are already fellows of the Royal Society because they're very astute. They look at people's coming along, their careers developing at the international level, and they invite people who they think are worthy of it to become fellows. So that was a great surprise. I have an old-fashioned view of these things, which is that you wait to be recognised. Mm-hmm. You don't push yourself forward. And in that case, the Royal Society, one of my colleagues at Newcastle was a fellow, and he was on one of the committees that selects engineers. And he knew about my achievements, my background, and he thought I'd be a good candidate. So he persuaded me to put in all the paperwork. So that was really great fun. You know that when you're a working scientist, you don't plan. Oh, I don't anyway. You don't plan on these happening. You just get on with your job, and now and again something nice happens, and it's so pleasant. But if it doesn't happen, well, that's okay. You know yourself. You feel you feel confident in your achievements. You feel confident in what you've done, and you don't worry really about those other things. But they're nice when they happen. So now there have been some others. Fellowship of the Australian Academy of Science. That also was. It was not a surprise because I was working with a group of fellows in Melbourne actually, and actually I'll tell you what I discovered after getting these awards, that finding people to recommend is hard work because when I sat on a committee, a selection panel, and the quality of the people on the list is just enormous, just wonderful what people have done. But at the end of the day, you've got a list in front of you. Then you've got to think, who are we going to ask for next year? And people are sitting around scratching their heads, and sometimes it's quite hard to think of somebody who's not already there that you can add to the list for next year. Anyway, I didn't realise this, that it was not easy to find good candidates because you've got to compete. It's a competitive thing. It's not. How can I say? It's not absolute. You can be highly accomplished, but if there's somebody who's even more highly accomplished, well, they'll get in front of you. Mm-hmm. So it's competition, not necessarily the best person.
You've helped the mining industry create billions of dollars of extra value using some would say, just simple bubbles. Do you have any other awards you want to share with us? In 2015, for example, you were awarded the Prime Minister's Prize for Science.
Yes, well, I did apply for that because the year previously, I think, I'd won, I'd become the New South Wales Scientist of the Year. Now that really was a surprise because, again, the committee, I'll tell you, the committee was having trouble finding a person. and they rang me up. The chairman rang me up, and I was working at a mine in Parkes. And I said, look, I can't hear you now, just now. Like, there's so much noise going on. Ring me back tonight when I'm back at the hotel. And that's what she did. And asked me if I wouldn't mind being put forward. And so it happened. But then the next year, having won the New South Wales Prize, it seemed, a good idea to try for the national one, which is what I did. And again, that was successful. I can't remember why it was successful. Oh, well, anyway, it's competitive, as I said, but, I must have done something attractive to the selection panel,
Then, just moving on to some of your other career highlights, Professor. Is there anything else that springs to mind?
Well, look, obviously, being selected for the chair here in Newcastle was, I was up against another candidate who was very highly accomplished. But I was coming from overseas and he was local. And he went on to have a distinguished career, but he was number 2. And I think the reason they chose me was simply because I've had that quite a long period overseas. I went to Cambridge first, got a PhD from Cambridge, worked in the oil industry in America, then back to Imperial College in London, which is a very highly esteemed institution. And from there I came to Newcastle. So I think my background and the international networking that I'd done probably stood me in good stead.
Professor, I believe Peter Burke mentioned to me that you've actually had tea with the Queen Elizabeth, that is. Is that true?
The
Queen Elizabeth.
Well, that's not quite, I'd say. What happened was that when I was at Imperial, there was a new wing was opened, and it was in my faculty or my school really, and the Queen came to open it, and the Duke, and I was there, but just as a member of staff really. So I had a few words with her and a few words with him. This was in the evening, about 6 or 7 o'clock, and the Duke said that this was about the 6th ceremony that they'd been to that day. So I realised how hard they had to work to be affable so long, and do so many things. But I wouldn't say I had tea with the Queen.
Professor, I'm just amazed by your energy and passion for learning. Even at 89, you stay on top of emails and use emojis when texting. Your mind is so active. Where does all that energy come from?
2 things. One is my inheritance in terms of genes and things, and the second thing, one is my wife, who's passed on now, but she had been a nurse and she was very good at looking after the family and making sure we had a good diet. So these days, I look after myself, but I'm the carer for my son. My son has got he lost his kidneys years ago. I gave him one, by the way, which kept him going for a while. But I have a nice family group around me. I am comfortable. The university salary was always, I think university people are very well paid, to my mind, in the sense that you can be paid for following your hobbies, which is what I do, and you're paid enough that you don't have to worry about things. It's not difficult, perhaps it's harder these days, but it's not difficult on the whole to make a very satisfactory, very comfortable life for you and your family. So I never worried too much about trying to make $1 billion. But you know, I think my motivation has always come from the work and the fact that it generates well, a comfortable life just from being at the university. So, getting my energy. Well, I look after myself very well. I have a bloke I call my geriatric doctor. He's not a geriatric at all, but he's a specialist in gerontology. And I see him every 6 months. And I've been doing this for about 6 years, maybe more now. And he just keeps me on the straight and narrow. One thing, I'm very lucky, I don't have anything like cancer or high blood pressure or anything like that. My only problem that's developed is what they call peripheral neuropathy. That is to say, the sensations from your extremities, your fingers or your hand and your feet, the nerves slow down. So my feet don't communicate very quickly with my brain, and so I have to use a walking stick. So the hand becomes the sensor, if you like. The walking stick provides me with the signals from the ground, and that goes to the brain quicker than from my feet. And that's incurable. But anyway, that's the only hazard I've got at the present time. But undoubtedly, you've got to die, and so it'll happen. But at the present time, I'm in good shape, and so I enjoy rude health, you might say.
Wonderful. Professor, I would love to know what keeps you motivated to continue your research. You're turning 90 next year. What is it that drives you to keep going?
The world drives me, because it's a sort of, I think it's inherent in the human race to be curious. And you see this with little kids. At a certain age, 5 or 6 maybe, they're always pestering you. Why is the sky blue, Daddy? And then they, before you have a chance to answer, they'll say, why are there so many colours in a rainbow? That kids, I think human people think, as a group, we see the world around us, we pose these questions and we look for answers. Well, that feeling seems to be, as people develop, that curiosity perhaps is lost. It's become subsumed in the challenges of ordinary life, if you see. And so, but it hasn't happened with me. I've always been curious about everything. Now, as I'm in the flotation field, I'm an experimentalist, so I see things. I do experiments with my students, and I see things. I'll just turn this thing off. I'll come back to that. Yeah, well, I'm an experimentalist, and the longer you work, the more you've seen, and the more cross-links you can make. Because, as I mentioned before, I got the idea for the Concorde out of the oil industry where I was working there. And that now, that can be, my experience there, my thoughts, my deep thinking on that problem were very useful in the flotation field. So I enjoy flotation, I enjoy thinking. And I'm never bored and I'm never lonely. Because any time you might think that might happen, well, I've got things going on in my head And I can think, oh, geez, how am I going to solve this? I've got this mathematical equation that I can't solve. How am I getting the approximate solution? Or I've got to build this device that does this and that, and I'm thinking about spatial things in my head. Well, that's a great asset, I reckon. So I never saw what I do as work. It was my life. And so the fact that it was valuable or useful in the sense of producing something of use to industry and the community, all those benefits were sort of an overlay. They were additional to the personal satisfaction that you get by thinking about original, having original thoughts, put it that way. And so that's what's kept me going. But I didn't need an external impetus to keep me going. It was always there, and so I just take advantage of it.
I'm now going to talk a little bit about how you're a true pioneer in innovation and flotation research. You've had a very long and illustrious career, and you're still going strong. I just wondered, Professor, what you see as your main invention.
Oh, well, look, the Jameson cell was no doubt that was the big kick-off. What happened was I started work in this field when I was at Imperial College in London in 1960. Late mid-60s, 1967 or so. I got friendly with a man who was in the Royal School of Mines, which is part of the Imperial College, and his name was Joe Kitchener. And Joe was a very, very well-known man in the field of chemistry. He was a chemist. And he got talking to me about bubbles, because he said to me that the mining industry was being transformed, that the high-grade deposits had been discovered and worked out, that the grades were falling, people were having to treat materials, had to grind finer and finer to release the valuable particles, and that was putting a strain on existing flotation equipment. He knew I had a background in the fluid mechanics side of bubble and particle mechanics, and he encouraged me to start work on flotation. Now, oddly enough, my first job in Australia, in Sydney, was at an ore smelter, a tin smelter, quite close to the centre of Sydney. It was just amazing that such a thing could exist. It was in what's now, I suppose it's Alexandria. Alexandria now is renowned for apartments. It's become a dormitory suburb, but it's only a stone's throw from Central Station. Anyway, Joe encouraged me to start work on why the small particles in particular, why are they difficult to float? And so I had a couple of PhD students. We worked on this for a number of years, and I got some ideas from that. And when I came back to Australia, I kept on working on this field because it's so important to the minerals industry. And I got encouragement from people in that industry to keep working on my ideas. And I produced some papers which indicated the directions the industrial equipment ought to go in order to be able to improve the recovery of fine particles. And that's how it came about. So when I came back to Australia, as I said, I was very lucky to get a number of very, very good students. We solved the problems from an academic point of view, but then came the problem, how do you put this into practice? And so I began to think in industrial terms and to come up with a device that would be, first of all, very simple, cheap to build. Secondly, it had to be very low maintenance. You couldn't have equipment with very small apertures through which the ore had to pass. And so those, and the other thing that happened at that time was that my supervisor at Cambridge published a paper with a theory from which you can predict the fluid mechanical circumstances that will make small bubbles. In other words, he had an equation which related the size of the bubbles to, among other things, what's called a shear rate, the degree to which you agitate the liquid in which the bubbles are sitting with the particles. So I looked at this paper and I thought, oh, I could probably devise something that would make the bubble sizes that I wanted, which was quite small, but also very simple. I had a grant from AMIRA, which is the Australian Minerals Industry Research Association, to do some test work on at various plants, and I took a very simple device made of wood, Meranti, and Perspex, so you could see through it, you could see what was happening. Anyway, it didn't work, but at least because I could see what was going on, I could see why it didn't work. So I came back to Newcastle to my lab, changed the design completely, and then it worked like a charm. So historically what happened then was I was working with MIM, Mount Isa Mines, who had an excellent team of research metallurgists at Mount Isa. I think there's nothing much to do in Mount Isa in the weekends except to go to the Irish Club, you see. There's a good bar there, or you could watch the State of Origin. But anyway, I asked them if I could work in the concentrator over the weekend to generate some data, and I did that. They did the assaying. The results were very good. And so they took it on for a year they put on a graduate metallurgist, a young man, to spend a year addressing scale-up possibilities, or what was going to happen when you scaled up. And again, it came through with flying colours. So MIM decided to take it on as a product. So that was really a great journey, because it was such a pleasure to work with these blokes on the mine, because they're many hundreds of miles from, 1,000 miles from the next town on the coast, and 1,000 kilometres anyway, but it's a long way away. And so they were a self-contained group of highly motivated, clever people, and it was a great pleasure to work with them. After work, at 4 o'clock in the afternoon, there was nothing much to do, so they had made a sort of a club where they got journal papers from Brisbane sent up to them, and they would debate. They would read these papers and debate. This was keeping abreast with the latest technology, the latest science, really. And then they would go through the papers and pick out anything that looked interesting. So it was a great pleasure to be there. It's not the most, how can I say, it's not a comfortable place to live, because it's very hot, and you're out you are really in the beginnings of the desert, from the top end of Queensland and the Northern Territory. So that's really when MIM then decided to take a licence from the university, which they did, and after a couple of years, 3 to 5 years, it really took off. Now, after that, I wasn't at a loose end, but I was thinking, what am I going to do next? And in this field of flotation, the particles that float the easiest, that are easy to catch with bubbles, are of intermediate size. They're about a hair's breadth. Some people's hair is fine, like 80 to 100 microns. By the way, fine wool, is 10 microns, so it's very fine. But anyway, but particles that are well above 100 microns are not easy to capture. Similarly, particles that are down minus 10 microns are equally hard to capture. So I said, well, righto, we've got something in the middle, which is the Jameson cell, which performs pretty well. I'll tackle now the fine particle, the ultra-fine particles, and then the other end was the very coarse particles that are bigger, I mean, maybe 2 or 3 times the thickness of a human hair. And I investigated those areas. The Concorde came up, has got a long history, because I worked in the oil industry in America, in oil, soon after or straight away from my graduation, my PhD. Went to California, worked in an oil research laboratory. They were having problems designing vacuum distillation columns. This is columns they use, distillation columns, to extract the low boiling point material, the petrol, out of crude oil, which is very high boiling point material. And so they were having troubles with their vacuum distillation system, which involved you're trying to suck something out of the bottom of a very tall column, and it's already at its boiling point. So you suck it out with lower pressure, and the pressure gets lower, it all starts to boil. And then the bubbles of steam or bubbles of gas that are generated.
Sorry, Professor.
So I'm in the oil industry trying to suck heavy, what they call residuals, out of the bottom of a vacuum still. And when you apply a pump and you're sucking it out, the stuff was boiling and releasing lots of bubbles, and the flow becomes supersonic. Now, this is all getting technical, but what it means is that the velocity of the fluid coming out of this machine was quite high, but the pressure was very low, so the volume is enormous. So instead of having 1-inch pipes or something, you've got to have things that are meters in diameter to pull it out. There was no theory at the time, no experiments. It was an area that hadn't been investigated. So when I left that oil company and went to Imperial, I took that on as a project to try to explain what was going on and predict what was happening, and then to carry out experiments where we could measure the behaviour of air bubbles in water reaching very high velocities in a venturi, it's called. Now, what happened was we could see these shock waves, but we couldn't hear them because we've got a mixture of air bubbles in water. Any sound that's emanated gets absorbed by the water. And so you could see a shock wave, which was evident because the bubbles had grown so big, they become clear. You can look through it. And so, but the key was this. I added to the water, in order to make the stable bubbles, I added a surfactant. A bit like, in the home, when you're doing the washing up, you've got something like Magic or something, I don't know what it's called. Anyway, just an ordinary detergent. And what I saw was amazing. The big bubbles broke up into little bubbles, lovely tiny bubbles. And when I got into flotation, I realised that they were the right size of bubbles for flotation. So that was in my mind. Now, a bit later, when I came back from Australia, I got quite a big grant from the finance industry. It was a bit of a rort. There was something called a syndicated research program, which encouraged people who made a big profit and needed a tax loss to put money into research. And the beauty was, if they put the money in on the 29th of June, they could claim the whole expense of the research program as a cost for that year against their big profits. And therefore, they got a big benefit, and I got a big benefit. Anyway, I decided I'd look at this, I'd look at the Concorde. I had this idea for the Concorde. I pushed that into that program and developed the machine really with that backing. But everything worked out pretty well. The main results we got had to be done in our laboratory, which was out at Cardiff in Newcastle. And we saw what we'd hoped to see, which was that we got much better performance, much better flotation recovery with these tiny, tiny particles. And we took a sample of quartz. The biggest of the quartz particles was 38 microns. Everything was smaller than that. So the average was about 6 microns. We're really looking at a very low area, very low size area. Well, from that point on, I began to reduce risk. If you've got an invention, this is my philosophy, if you've got an invention and you want to get it taken up by industry, you've got to reduce risk for the possible licensee. And the way to do that was to get the thing tested in operating mines. And it just happened at that moment that BHP had bought Western Mining. Western Mining had a number of very good nickel mines. Big problem really was the water quality. The water had more salt in it than the sea, and it was causing the ores to behave in a very strange way, and which was that the ore, when you ground them fine, the waste material would flocculate. That means the particles would gather together, and the valuable mineral you're looking for was hidden from the bubbles. The bubbles couldn't find these valuable particles because they're all shielded inside the flocks. Anyway, the Concorde, I looked at this, and the Concorde seemed to me to have a big advantage, which was that we deliberately made an environment with a high rate of energy dissipation, which is the shock wave. So by chance, BHP introduced or started a big research program from all around the world. People came looking at this problem of how to float these very fine particles, and the Concorde was part of that. So, and again, we got excellent results and unexpected results, in the sense that the more we put the ore through the Concorde, we recycle, the better everything got. And I think what was happening was that these flocculated particles were being broken down by the shear, and when they came back in a recycle way, the valuable particles had liberated, until you were able to catch them the second time, even though they weren't caught the first time round. And quite about the same time, I was approached by Anglo American, who had a lot of, or still do have a lot of platinum mines in South Africa, where they have to grind the platinum ore very finely to release the platinum particles from the rock. It's just incredible what they do, because the platinum concentration is only, in their ores, was only about 5-6 parts per million. So if you took a ton of rock, you're getting milligrams of this valuable, less micrograms of this valuable material. So they approached me to go and do some test work at a platinum mine in the western, what do they call it? Well, anyway, it was in the very north of South Africa, quite close to Namibia. And I went there, and it was amazing. They gave me 500 tons of rock to process and then put through my machine, my test work machine. And we got excellent results. So I began to look for licensees.
Let's talk about one of your inventions, the Concorde cell. Could you share with me a little of the story regarding the time and years it took to develop and patent this technology?
What happened was, I still had very good relations with MIM and the Jameson cell. The ownership had changed; they'd become Xstrata Technology. And I approached them and said, I've got all these wonderful results, would you be interested in taking it on as a product? And they said, let's wait a bit, let's get some more results, and then we'll see if we can take it on. And what happened then was a disaster, which was the beginnings of the global financial crisis in 2008. And the mining industry virtually went into a sort of survival mode. And all the people I used to talk to either got the sack or they were moved into production jobs to save money. And the idea of a new product coming along, if you look at Metso's profits, by the way, I'll bet they tanked when the GFC started. But anyway, there was no interest at all in new technology. They were trying to do their best with what they had. So that sort of lapsed. But of course, what I did was, I said, okay, I can't find a taker on. I want to take it on at this moment. Let's do some more research. Let's find out how we can scale it up and all that sort of thing. But it wasn't until 2016 that the Concorde, that I really got going, because I was at a meeting in Peru, and one of Metso's biggest competitor was at the meeting, saw my presentation, said, "This looks terrific, can we have a talk?" And so they sent a party from America to come and talk to me. But I much preferred to work with Outotec, because Outotec had people with a strong scientific base. And in particular, I had good relations with a bloke called Kari Heiskanen. Kari was in the university sector, but he had very close links with Outotec. So I contacted, I don't know, he might have contacted me. Anyway, we talked together, and we discussed our results. We did some more test work, and then eventually Outotec took it on as a product. But then at about the same time as they did that, and they were taken over by Metso, although, there was a merger.
Yes.
Yeah, merger with Metso. So that's how Metso came into it. Now, you mentioned timeline.
Yes.
I'll go to the Jameson cell, because that followed, the development followed what I found out later was a classical curve. There was a banker from Germany at the time who followed the development of new technology. This was from the 1860s. And he developed a curve which showed what it looked like. So initially, nothing much happens. You sell one, and then you wait another year or two, and then you'll sell the second one, and then it's like a snowball. People in the industry, in the mining industry, they see the thing working. They eventually say to themselves, "Oh, we've got to have one of them," and so they buy them, and then it snowballs. That really does. It does increase exponentially for a while. But of course, the more machines you sell, the smaller is the market that's left. And so you reach almost a market saturation where the only market is new deposits or economic conditions that make it imperative to try and get more out of what you're doing at the present time. So that's the sort of curve that's the sort of result that I found. It's true of virtually any product. I'm sure this bloke's theory had some adjustable parameters, which would be particular for a particular market. But it looks to me as if if you don't have a war or a global financial crisis or COVID, you can predict what the market's going to look like over a period of, let's say, 20 years. But then if you get impacted by something completely outside the market's control, then you really are, you're influenced by things you can't do anything about. And so, but even in a good time, it does take quite a while to get going. I should also tell you that it's a big problem for inventors, because you've normally only got a time of 20 years. If it takes 20 years to get at full steam ahead, the return that you're getting as an inventor is so small that it's not worth putting the time in, the effort into it. You may as well forget about it, just go to the beach.
There are many challenges around inventions, IP, and patent protection. So you've spent many years and much effort on developing Concorde technology. What year did you sell Concorde to Outotec, and how did that happen?
That contact with Kari Heiskanen happened about 2016 or so, maybe, 2016. He came out here, saw what we were doing, immediately understood, went back with a favourable report. I was invited to go to Helsinki to talk to people, and the developments took place from there. I think it was around about early 2018, was it? When it really took off, because the end of 2017 we had negotiated a license agreement with Outotec, and early 2018 was when it took off. I spent a lot of time with Outotec people. I sent two of my blokes to Pori, to the research laboratory, for a month to help the people there get started, set up their pilot plant and get the experiments running there. And so I had a very strong entanglement, if you like, with, that's not quite the word, but you know what I mean. It's collaboration with Outotec in those early years. And as people, see, what happened was that they developed contacts, people approached them, we did test work with quite a few people. We did work with BHP on the Mount Keith ore. This was the nickel ore that I'd already done test work 10 years earlier. And we repeated the good results and got, very, it looked pretty good. And as a consequence, they ordered 3 big cells from Metso now. It had become Metso. And similar things happen in other parts of the world, but it's just a long road to hoe, a long row to hoe to get an invention accepted.
Yeah. Professor, the IP then went to Outotec in 2018. Could you share a little about why you chose Outotec?
I'd been impressed with Outotec for a long time. Partly, I'd seen they were the sort of company that published papers, genuine scientific sort of papers, or research papers. It wasn't just sales papers. And I also got involved, they don't know this, but I got involved in some sort of patent dispute with a firm of lawyers in Sydney. They wanted an expert witness on some aspect, which I did. But that required me to look very deeply into an earlier technology called the OK impeller. And I not only saw published papers, but I got a PhD thesis from the Helsinki University of Technology, which was done by a bloke from Outotec. And I thought this was high quality work, and I hadn't seen anything like that from anybody else, any other equipment manufacturers who were much more interested in sales. Their main rival, you'd see them at exhibitions. There was no one on their booths, their stands, who understood about the basics of flotation. They were very good at looking for prospective customers and taking them to lunch at the golf club or something. That was their forte. And I thought, I don't really want to work with people like this. Now, their philosophy has changed enormously since then. You'd never recognise them now. But anyway, that's why I chose to go with Outotec. And well, the people I deal with now, right now, very competent people at the basics. You know, they've got PhDs in mineral processing. They have great expertise, and I admire that. So I've never regretted working with that group.
Professor, you presented Concorde technology to the industry via peer-reviewed articles in 2010. 10 years later, Concorde was adopted into the industry with successful commercial scale references. In 2026, Concorde will celebrate 20 years since the initial IP. So, coming now to the question, what are your thoughts on how Metso has developed the Concorde cell over recent years?
Well, they've done a good job. I don't have any reservations about what they're doing. I must say that one of the big pluses was that they stole two of my research engineers who now work for Metso, and that they are you see, acquiring top people. These blokes are very good who now work for Metso. Excellent backgrounds, in their 30s, they're mature people, they've got experience, they've done a lot of test work on plants all around the world, and as far as I can see, they're doing an excellent job. I keep in touch with them, and one man is based in Turkey, he is a Turk. The other one is based in Canada, because he did a PhD at McGill University, which is one of the best in the world, or possibly the best in the world in this field. And he met a young lady there she took him off to rural Canada, or the forests of North Canada, really. Anyway, so that struck me as being a good move. They moved very quickly, by the way, to do that. With those sort of people, they've now got the technical backup, the technical heft, if you like, to tackle unusual problems that always come up. And I couldn't really fault what Metso have done. No, I mean, it's just they're dealing with the world as it is. They're dealing with the difficulty of getting a new technology introduced, and they're doing it in a very good way. They're experienced people. They're not expecting things to happen overnight, but they're putting in resources. They're developing the market. I think they're doing everything well.
Professor, the Concorde cell is well respected and well established, and a de facto standard in the flotation industry all around the world. The Concorde is almost like a supercharged version of the Jameson cell. And I guess in terms of the developments of Concorde, there's a lot of potential for the technology, which we perhaps haven't quite understood yet. What are your thoughts on the Concorde cell being a low-risk and proven technology in the industry, Professor?
I regard the Concorde as a niche market because, as I explained earlier, the existing technologies work very well for the sort of mid-sized particles. But in many places, the losses from their plants are not recovered in the existing technology. Those losses occur in the very fine particle range. For companies that have to grind fine to liberate the values, anything you do is a good thing. And you see, if you've got a difficult ore which you have to grind finely, then you're unlikely to get a very high recovery. That is, see, normally with a simple material like chalcopyrite, which is found in Chile and South America, that ore doesn't have to be ground very finely, and they get very high recovery. But Mount Keith, for example, and other places, recovery could have been below 80% overall. So it means a lot of money there to be made if you can get, if you can lift that up by another 10%. A lot of money in it. So that's the sort of niche that it will, where it does excel.
That brings us to the end of our interview today. Thank you so much for taking the time to speak with us, Professor. We truly appreciate your ongoing dedication and valuable contributions to the advancement of the flotation industry.